We have a massive stack of sources on the table today. We're pulling from recent institutional strategy papers, a mountain of our own research notes, and the foundational text of a framework that is just quietly making its way through the upper echelons of global leadership.
Yeah, the timing for this specific framework couldn't be better. I mean, if you look across the corporate landscape right now, there's just a pervasive sense of exhaustion.
Oh, absolutely. Welcome to a custom-tailored executive deep dive. You are sitting in the room with us as the third person in this conversation.
Glad you could join us.
Our mission today is to extract the absolute core of Sandeep Chavan's Inevitability Architecture and the Unified Power Architecture, or UPA.
Right, and UPA is fascinating because C-suites are burning out, turnarounds are stalling, and traditional management philosophies just seem to be hitting a wall of, diminishing returns.
Which brings us to the hook of this entire philosophy. And it is a concept that completely upends the traditional image of the successful executive.
It really does. It's a complete paradigm shift.
Usually when we picture a leader exercising power, we picture intense kinetic energy. We picture the war room.
Right. Oh, yeah. The CEO who hasn't slept in 3 days.
Exactly. Firing off late-night emails.
Yeah.
The sheer, unrelenting hustle required to just bend a market to their will.
Because we have inherently linked the concept of power with visible, dramatic exertion.
Like the loud general.
Right, or the charismatic founder rallying the troops. It's the absolute force of human personality dragging a failing project across the finish line.
And we treat that struggle as heroic. But Chavan takes that exact image, the sweating, hustling, hyperactive leader, and diagnoses it as a glaring symptom of systemic failure.
Which is such a wild thing to wrap your head around at first.
It is. What if all that hustle, all that friction and hard work isn't a sign of dedication? What if it is a structural alarm bell ringing in the background?
Signaling that a leader has fundamentally failed at their actual job.
Yes. The core premise here is that if a leader has to push that hard, their underlying design is broken.
We're shifting the definition of power away from the character of the leader, the psychological games they play, and moving it entirely to the what and the where.
True power, in Chavan's framework, is silent. It operates like cold physics. You stop managing people and you start engineering environments.
This flips centuries of leadership dogma on its head. I mean, think about a staple of executive reading, like the 48 Laws of Power.
Right. That entire philosophy treats power as a psychological game.
Exactly. Manipulation, deception, playing on human insecurities. It's all about being the smartest, most cunning actor in the room.
But Chavan treats power as a structural reality. And to understand how that works, we first have to dismantle the most sacred cow of modern corporate culture.
The moral imperative of hard work.
Right. And that moral imperative is deeply ingrained. We're conditioned to believe that the intensity of our struggle is the direct measure of a project's value.
If it was agonizing, it must be important. In the boardroom, this manifests as what Chavan calls the fever of the actor.
The phrase itself suggests, like, a medical condition or a delirium.
It essentially is a systemic illness within modern leadership. The executive lives in a state of chronic fever.
They equate their own physical and mental exhaustion with effectiveness.
Right. They wear their burnout as a badge of sovereignty. The ego insists on being the protagonist of every corporate narrative.
Because the ego believes that if it stops initiating action, if it stops pushing the boulder, the world will just stop spinning.
Which brings us to the crucial distinction Chavan makes between effort power and effortless power.
Okay, let's break that down. Effort power, which he categorizes merely as force, is exactly that image of pushing a boulder up a steep incline.
You have to expend a massive amount of caloric and cognitive energy. You have to constantly monitor the boulder.
Because the second you take your hands off it to rest, it rolls right back over you and crushes you. The depletion rate of the leader is massive.
Force is the sound of an engine actively struggling against a brake. It's high energy, it's expensive, and it relies entirely on the leader's finite biological stamina.
So effortless power, on the other hand, is the gravity pulling the boulder down the other side of the hill.
Exactly. So struggle is stripped of its virtue. In the UPA framework, if you are struggling, you have built a slope that works against your own objectives.
When you feel that crushing weight of effort, you aren't experiencing power and motion, you are experiencing friction.
You're feeling the grinding resistance of an organizational system that is misaligned with your strategic intent.
Every ounce of extreme effort you exert as a leader is just you paying out of pocket to overcome the friction of your own bad design.
And that out-of-pocket expense is what the framework calls the noise tax.
The noise tax. I love that term. Because we celebrate a leader's ability to pivot rapidly, their micromanagement, their high-energy exertion, as ego-driven agility.
But really, it's a massive strategic tax paid because the architecture is deficient.
The psychology of the actor views stillness as a terrifying vacuum, right?
Yes. When a disruption hits the market, the ego-driven leader feels an intense internal mandate to do something immediately, just to justify their position.
They force a rapid pivot. They demand hustle.
But forcing an outcome before the organizational environment is actually aligned leads to premature resolution.
Meaning the action was forced through sheer willpower, but the underlying mechanisms of the company weren't ready to support it.
Exactly the issue. The problem isn't actually solved. It just creates unresolved ripples.
So you force a team to change direction overnight without aligning their incentive structures or updating their software tools.
And that creates massive internal friction. That friction stores itself as thermal energy in the system, travels out to the edge nodes of the company, and returns 2 quarters later as an unexpected crisis.
And the tragic irony is that the leader then points to this new crisis and says, look, a new fire for me to heroically extinguish.
When in reality, they are fighting the ghost of their own premature pivot.
It's an endless loop of self-inflicted heroism. So the alternative Chavan presents is action without actor.
The concept demands waiting for the alignment threshold. It is the discipline to wait until the right strategic move requires zero secondary force to execute.
The leader doesn't violently initiate the action. They allow the action to emerge naturally because the architecture of the organization demands it.
I always picture a mechanic watching someone violently push a car with a seized engine up a steep hill.
Yeah, the person pushing is sweating, exhausted, and demanding praise for their incredible work ethic.
And the UPA architect walks by and asks, why don't you fix the engine, pave the road, and just release the brake?
That perfectly encapsulates the shift from force to power. Power is a property of the field, not a projection of the leader's personal energy.
It is. But, if I'm a founder listening to this, someone who built a company from the ground up through sheer grit and late nights, this has to sound almost insulting.
Right. Is the assertion here that all our celebrated hustle culture, the move fast and break things ethos, is really just a loud, embarrassing mask for incompetence in system design?
It is a harsh diagnosis, but yes, hustle culture is the primary symptom of an architectural deficit.
If achieving your quarterly objective requires constant oversight, weekend emails, and high emotional excitation from the C-suite, the design has failed.
The ultimate goal isn't to be the strongest person pushing the broken car.
The goal is to be the architect who grades the road so perfectly that the vehicle moves forward the moment the brake is disengaged.
And that transition from pushing the car to grading the road leads us to the mechanics of how this is actually done.
Right. If struggle is just friction, how do we systematically design a frictionless environment?
Chavan argues we have to completely change our visual model of the organization. We have to stop seeing a company as a vertical hierarchy of people.
And start visualizing it as a physical landscape.
This is the concept of consequence geometry, and it is where the theory becomes highly practical.
You map your organization as a literal topology. Physical geography has mountains, valleys, and fault lines.
Your company has slopes, gradients, and stagnation points. The critical question for the architect is, where does the water naturally pool?
By water, we're talking about the flow of energy, information, and capital.
Exactly. Water doesn't negotiate with the terrain. It doesn't hold meetings. It just follows the unforgiving path of least resistance.
So a leader has to map the existing gradient of their company to find out where the path of least resistance is leading people astray.
You look for the puddles.
What does a puddle or a stagnation point actually look like in a Fortune 500 company?
Well, the most common manifestation is a bureaucratic swamp.
Okay, picture that.
Imagine a procurement project that requires 5 physical signatures from different department heads, and it consistently sits on someone's desk for 3 winks.
That isn't a problem with lazy employees. That is a flat spot in your organizational geometry.
The slope of the process simply isn't steep enough to overcome the internal viscosity of that department.
Another example would be an information silo, where critical market data reaches a specific middle management node but never propagates to the product team.
It acts as a sinkhole. It absorbs the system's kinetic energy without producing any forward output.
So to fix these topological nightmares, Chavan introduces a shift from goal setting to field calibration.
Goal setting, in the traditional sense, is pure ego projection.
A leader fixates on a specific point in the future, say, a revenue target, and tries to pull the present reality toward it through sheer motivational force.
But field calibration is a structural intervention. Instead of fixating on the future point, the architect focuses entirely on adjusting the present environment.
They tweak the incentive structures, the communication pathways, and the software tools so that the desired outcome becomes mathematically unavoidable.
You don't yell at people to run faster. You change the tilt of the floor they are running on.
Wow. The underlying mechanism there is the law of least resistance.
Right. Human behavior in a corporate setting is simply a resolution of the environment.
If a CEO wants high-speed execution, giving a motivational speech is a waste of breath.
They must systematically remove the friction stones until execution is the easiest, most comfortable path available.
When the consequence geometry is properly graded, employees choose the correct action, not out of loyalty to the boss, but because it's the most logical, frictionless path forward.
Which grants the leader what the framework calls diagnostic sovereignty.
You stop playing therapist to your team.
Exactly. You stop getting distracted by interpersonal drama, which Chavan classifies as mere noise, and you focus entirely on the structural signal.
Neutralizing the narrative is a massive relief for a leader.
Oh, huge. If there's a sudden spike of frustration or infighting between the sales and engineering teams, you don't hold a massive town hall meeting to unpack everyone's feelings.
You look at the consequence geometry.
Usually you'll find a misaligned incentive like sales is compensated for promising custom features, while engineering is compensated for maintaining core stability.
That is a structural fault line. So you subtly adjust the architecture of the incentives so that the noise has no substrate to grow on.
The employees feel like they resolve their differences organically, but they're actually just following the new geometry you installed.
It makes me think of a landscape architect. If a specific patch of a garden is dying, they don't stand there with a bucket, frantically throwing water on those specific plants every day.
Right. They take a rake, they subtly regrade the dirt around the garden, and they let the next rainstorm do the work.
The water naturally flows exactly where it's needed based on the new slope. The environment does the heavy lifting.
And the leader's energy is preserved.
But let's ground this in the reality of a modern, highly distributed remote workforce.
Sure.
If I'm managing a global team across 6 time zones, I don't have a physical office floor to observe. How does a leader practically see these invisible slopes and swamps when the entire company exists in the cloud?
The topology of a digital organization is defined by its software stack, its communication latency, and its approval routing.
So you find the slopes by tracking the metrics of friction.
Exactly. Where are the chronic delays? Where are the repeated data entry errors? Where is the leader constantly required to step in and make a manual tie-breaking decision?
If a specific Slack channel is generating anxiety and long convoluted threads, that channel is a steep incline.
Or if a CRM tool requires an employee to enter the same client data 3 times in different modules, that is a bureaucratic swamp.
You are looking for any area where cognitive energy is being expended without directly contributing to the final output.
Which brings up a critical variable. When you map this digital topology and you start making macro adjustments to the slope, moving information across that landscape takes time.
The physics of time in a large organization is unforgiving.
Time is the silent killer of corporate strategy, and this introduces the most critical metric in the entire UPA framework: alignment threshold time, or ATT.
Let's clearly define ATT. It is the precise mathematical measurement of how long it takes for a macro design shift executed at the very top of the organization to become a functioning geographic reality at the furthest edge node.
Like a frontline customer service rep, it measures the true speed of your sovereignty.
The danger hidden within ATT is what Chavan calls the ghost in the machine, or the coupling delay.
This is the terrifying dark space between the moment a CEO issues a strategic command and the moment the underlying system actually begins executing it.
Right. If an organization's ATT is too long, the executive suite is effectively living in a hallucination.
They're managing a simulation of the company based on the decisions they made a month ago.
While the edge nodes are fighting real-time market reality without the new strategy actually being in place.
The ultimate consequence of a long ATT is the strategy death spiral.
Imagine the external macroeconomic environment is shifting at a frequency of every 30 days.
A new AI tool is released, a competitor changes pricing, a supply chain bottleneck occurs.
But your company's ATT, the total time it takes to sense the change, decide on a pivot, align the internal departments, and deploy the new action is 90 days.
Your strategy is dead on arrival. You're deploying a brilliant, meticulously crafted solution for problem A, but the market has already moved on to problem C.
Your frequency is fatally mismatched to the environment. In Chavan's view, sovereignty is not a title. It is the luxury of operating at a faster internal clock speed than the world around you.
Think of a pilot pulling the yoke of a massive commercial jet to avoid a mountain.
Oh, that control lag of those agonizing seconds where the pilot is pulling with all their might, but the nose of the plane hasn't actually lifted yet.
That is the coupling delay. If the mountain is approaching faster than the nose can lift, the plane crashes, regardless of the pilot's intent or effort.
To combat this control lag, traditional leaders attempt temporal regrading.
They try to shorten the loop, they eliminate redundant meetings, they try to flatten the hierarchy, they push decision-making authority closer to the edge nodes.
But Chavan warns that these traditional methods eventually hit a hard, impassable wall. They hit the biological ceiling.
Which implies we're bumping up against the evolutionary limits of human wetware.
We absolutely are hitting those limits. The human brain and the complex social hierarchies we build to coordinate thousands of brains simply lack the processing power to handle the high-frequency volatility of a globally connected 21st century market.
If a company's operating system relies on humans talking to other humans, reading memos, interpreting guidelines, and reaching consensus, it will always be too slow to survive.
So to break through the biological ceiling, the architecture must transition from relying on policy to relying on protocol.
The distinction between policy and protocol is massive.
Right. A policy requires a human intermediary. It has to be read, interpreted, discussed in a committee, and subjectively applied to a situation.
That generates massive temporal friction. A protocol in this context is a self-executing automated rule.
When a trigger condition is met, a protocol executes instantly.
There is no committee meeting. The logic is predetermined and automated.
This is the only way to drive your ATT down to a competitive level and achieve high-frequency sovereignty.
But, if humans are the inherent bottleneck, if our need to discuss and interpret is the biological ceiling, the logical conclusion of this framework seems incredibly dark.
Yeah. Are we essentially designing human beings out of the decision-making loop entirely? Are we just building a corporate machine that operates completely autonomously?
It's not about eliminating human intelligence. It is about relocating it to where it provides actual leverage.
You are designing humans out of the execution loop.
You don't want your smartest directors wasting their cognitive bandwidth on repetitive routing decisions or subjective conflict resolution.
You elevate human intelligence to the architectural loop. Humans shouldn't be making the micro decisions. They should be designing the protocols that allow the system to make those micro decisions instantly.
We're moving the human out of the engine room and into the designer's studio.
But that migration inherently requires the architecture to leave the physical boardroom and enter the software stack.
The nature of where power resides has fundamentally migrated.
This migration is what Chavan calls the silent coup.
Many traditional CEOs still walk around acting as if they and their human middle managers are running the company.
But in reality, algorithms have already staged a coup. The algorithms are the new middle managers.
The actual alphabet of a modern organization, how a task is assigned, how an employee's performance is measured, how capital is routed, is almost entirely dictated by enterprise software.
And this exposes a terrifying vulnerability for non-technical leaders. It introduces the concept of compute sovereignty.
Sovereignty is no longer a legal designation filed in Delaware. It's a technical specification of your network.
If your organization's architecture requires a cryptographic handshake from a third-party entity that you do not own,
say you rely entirely on an external cloud provider's proprietary logic, or a SaaS platform's unchangeable workflow to process your core business,
then you are not a sovereign entity. You are a vulnerable tenant.
Because if that third-party SaaS provider updates their algorithm or changes their routing logic, your entire internal consequence geometry changes overnight.
And you had absolutely no say in it. Your corporate border has been crossed cryptographically.
Therefore, Chavan states that a true leader must possess root access to their system's logic.
Root access is the capability to audit, unpack, and alter the fundamental code that dictates the flow of energy and information in your organization.
This leads to the necessity of API-driven leadership.
The modern executive does not lead through human negotiation. They lead by integrating systems seamlessly via application programming interfaces.
They adjust the API parameters, and the behavior of a 10,000-person organization shifts instantly without a single motivational memo being drafted.
This completely redefines how a leader interacts with data. The framework demands a shift away from the artifact delay of historical reporting.
Moving entirely to live telemetry.
Right. A quarterly or even weekly report is an artifact. It is an autopsy of the past. It tells the executive why the system failed last month.
Telemetry is a live, high-resolution sensory nervous system feeding real-time operational data directly into the architecture.
Telemetry allows the system itself to sense microscopic deviations, a slight drop in alignment, a microspike in friction, and self-correct via protocol before a human executive even needs to open a dashboard.
Imagine owning a sprawling, multi-million-dollar smart mansion. It has the best security, the best climate control.
But you realize the entire smart home operating system is controlled by a server sitting in your neighbor's basement.
You can't change the thermostat, you can't dim the lights, and you can't even unlock your own front door without your neighbor's server granting you permission.
You hold the legal deed to the house, but you have zero actual power over the environment.
That is the exact position of a CEO who lacks compute sovereignty. If you cannot unilaterally change the underlying code dictating the flow of your operations, your authority is a complete illusion.
So let's confront the reality for the traditional executive.
Okay.
If I am a CEO who came up through sales or finance, someone who doesn't know Python, doesn't understand API endpoints, and glazes over when the CTO talks about compute stacks, am I inherently obsolete in a UPA-driven world?
How does a non-technical leader survive this?
Yeah.
Well, they survive by understanding that they don't need to write the syntax, but they absolutely must govern the logic.
A CEO becomes obsolete only if they try to lead through effort, speeches, and manual policy, while their competitors are leading through APIs and automated protocols.
If a non-technical CEO leaves the system design entirely to the IT department because they find it confusing, they have abdicated their sovereignty to the IT department.
The architect must own the logic gates. They must be able to say to the engineers, the consequence geometry here is causing friction. Rewrite the protocol so the path of least resistance aligns with this specific strategic outcome.
The C-suite has to learn a new language of power.
But if the protocols are running the company, if the APIs are handling the integration, and if telemetry is automatically self-correcting the minor deviations.
What on earth is the human leader actually doing all day?
Exactly. If they aren't pushing the boulder, what does their Tuesday look like? Chavan said they must become the exact opposite of the hyperactive boss.
They must master what is termed the thermodynamics of command.
In traditional force-based systems, the leader is the primary source of heat.
They add noise, panic, ego, and artificial urgency to the system to force movement.
Under the UPA framework, the leader becomes a low-excitation entity. They act as the ultimate heat sink.
A thermal regulator for the corporation. Instead of winding everybody up and demanding a sense of urgency, the leader absorbs the ambient friction and panic of the environment.
They neutralize it and return pure, cold logic back to the system.
Achieving this requires a near impossible subjugation of the executive ego. The leader must practice absolute strategic non-interference.
Remember the automated protocols we just discussed.
Right. Every single time a leader decides to manually reach into the system to override a protocol, perhaps because there's a crisis and they want to visibly prove they are in charge,
They are actively destroying the structural muscles of their own organization.
they instantly re-inject the biological ceiling.
If a CEO manually intervenes to expedite a stalled shipment, the edge nodes, the employees, learn a very dangerous lesson.
They stop looking at the system's laws for resolution and they start looking at the CEO.
They learn that the way to get things done is to wait for a manual override. The CEO has just created a massive dependency loop, drastically increasing the company's ATT.
The leader must become a silent operator. You step out of the kinetic engine room and you physically and mentally relocate to the observation deck.
You watch the high-fidelity telemetry to ensure the system is sensing and self-correcting.
You do not intervene to fix isolated problems. You intervene solely to calibrate the architectural field so the system fixes the problem itself.
The desired end state here is stability dominance, achieving a condition of cold coherence.
When your internal clock speed is completely decoupled from human friction and your alignment is mathematically perfect, the external market is no longer a threat.
The external market is forced to adapt to your internal physics. You stop reacting to industry disruptions. You set the baseline beat of the industry.
It is the final transition from leading through a chain of command to leading through a field.
In a traditional chain, information painstakingly travels up the ladder, is processed, and a decision travels back down.
It's agonizingly high latency.
In a field architecture, every node has access to the same primary signal simultaneously.
The organization moves flawlessly, not because a brilliant command was shouted down the chain, but because the geometry of the field makes the collective movement inevitable.
Chavan identifies this state as inertial sovereignty.
If you put on a pair of high-end noise-canceling headphones, the technology inside doesn't try to shout over the noise of the airplane engine.
Right. It listens to the chaotic noise, and it calmly emits a perfect, mathematically inverted anti-frequency.
The two waves meet, and the chaos is neutralized into silence. The low-excitation leader is that anti-frequency.
They ground the system, allowing the signal to travel without distortion.
Okay, but let's be realistic about human nature.
Yeah.
For a type A, highly aggressive executive, sitting on the observation deck watching telemetry sounds like a nightmare.
How do they justify their compensation? How do a board of directors and the employees distinguish between a leader practicing strategic non-interference and a leader who is just asleep at the wheel?
The distinction lies entirely in diagnostic sovereignty.
A leader who is asleep at the wheel is ignorant of the system's state. They don't know a crisis is happening until the company is already bleeding capital.
Exactly. A low-excitation leader knows exactly what is happening at a microscopic level because they are actively monitoring high-fidelity telemetry.
They aren't doing nothing. They are actively witnessing the structural alignment hold under pressure.
If the telemetry indicates a metric has dropped below the acceptable alignment threshold, they don't jump into a Slack channel and start yelling.
They quietly rewrite the API protocol to remove the newly identified friction point.
It's a state of highly active observation paired with cold structural intervention devoid of emotional performance.
It is a completely different paradigm of executive skill. It requires profound discipline.
And when a leader reaches that state of cold coherence, we enter the final phase of the framework, Section 6, the eternal signal.
When the daily friction is gone, the leader transcends the operational grind.
They stop managing the present entirely because the present is automated, and they begin engineering the deep future.
This is the philosophical endgame of the unified power architecture. It marks the transition from chasing wins to engineering eras.
In the traditional management model, power is a finite trophy to be won over and over again. Every fiscal quarter is a new, exhausting battle for supremacy.
Under UPA, power is not a trophy. It is a frequency to be tuned.
A properly aligned, frictionless architecture creates an era of market dominance that is designed to outlast the biological life of the architect who built it.
And the reason an era can outlast its creator is because the laws of UPA are fractal. Chavan introduces the concept of scale invariance.
The exact same cold physics consequence geometry, field calibration, ATT, the noise tax supply, whether you're organizing the workflow of a 3-person startup, managing a global supply chain spanning continents, or orchestrating massive geopolitical alliances.
The underlying math of power does not change just because the organism gets larger.
Which leads to the absolute zenith of organizational flow, the creation of the zero latency node.
We discussed the coupling delay, the terrifying lag between the CEO's intent and the frontline worker's execution.
In a perfected UPA state, that gap is mathematically erased.
Because the edge nodes have unfettered access to the exact same raw compute, the same logic protocols, and the same telemetry as the architect.
They process an external shock and arrive at the exact same strategic conclusion instantaneously.
An employee facing a novel problem doesn't have to pause and ask, what would the boss want me to do?
They simply ask, what does the logic of our architecture demand?
And because they are looking at the exact same dashboard as the CEO, they execute the optimal move in perfect, frictionless unison.
At the zenith, power shifts from being an action to becoming a state of being.
The architect has successfully externalized their own intuition, their own strategic genius, into the code of the system itself.
Power stops being a frantic goal to be chased. It becomes the invisible, inevitable side effect of perfect design.
Like gravity, it doesn't need a PR team to announce it, it doesn't need to be verbally defended, and it doesn't need to be justified.
Authority dissolves entirely into absolute predictability. The corporate system has become a high-resolution, automated reflex of the architect's mind.
I think of a master clockmaker in Switzerland centuries ago.
The true master doesn't stand next to the clock, constantly turning the gears with their own hands to ensure it keeps time.
They painstakingly build a timepiece so perfectly balanced, so devoid of internal friction, that it winds itself using the subtle changes in the ambient temperature of the room.
It runs flawlessly for generations, long after the clockmaker has turned to dust.
That is the ultimate realization of inertial sovereignty, a system so beautifully designed that it sustains its own power.
There is one lingering doubt I have, though.
What's that?
If we systematically remove all the human friction, all the struggle, all the messy emotional disagreements from the corporate environment, is there a risk that we accidentally sterilize the company?
Oh, like don't we lose the creative sparks, the wild innovations that often come from that messy human collision of ideas?
It is the most common fear when executives first encounter UPA, but the framework argues the exact opposite reality.
Friction does not create innovation. Friction consumes the cognitive energy required for innovation.
Exactly. By mathematically removing the structural friction of bureaucratic swamps and ego-driven pivots, you free up massive reserves of human cognitive load.
Your engineers and creatives aren't exhausted from fighting broken procurement policies or navigating corporate politics.
They have the surplus energy required to experiment, to sense subtle shifts in the market environment, and to innovate.
The architecture does not dictate what they think. It provides a frictionless, perfectly sloped environment for their best thinking to seamlessly become reality.
We have covered immense ground today.
We really have. We started in the exhausting, sweaty reality of the fever of the actor, watching leaders burn themselves out pushing a boulder up a jagged hill.
And we have explored the path all the way to the serene, instantaneous alignment of the zero latency node.
The objective was to hand you the blueprints to stop pushing the boulder and start designing the hill.
But theories fade if the vocabulary isn't adopted. To ensure these tools actually integrate into your daily strategic thinking, we are going to formalize the language.
Let's run through the closing requirement of this deep dive. The Chavanian Glossary for Architects.
These are the 4 foundational concepts you must take back to your boardroom and begin using immediately.
Concept 1, ATT, or Alignment Threshold Time.
This is the mathematical speed limit of your organizational sovereignty.
It measures the exact temporal delay between a macro decision initiated at the top and the micro execution realized at the edge.
If your ATT is slower than the market's frequency of change, you are managing a ghost simulation of your company.
Concept 2, API-driven leadership.
This is the stark realization that algorithms have staged a silent coup and are now your true middle managers.
You must lead not through human negotiation, memos, and policy, but through integrated, automated protocols.
A true leader must possess root access to their system's logic to maintain compute sovereignty, regardless of their personal technical background.
Concept 3, the noise tax.
This is the high caloric energy, the structural friction, the systemic exhaustion, and the interpersonal drama that a company pays as a daily penalty for poor architectural design.
Remember, hustle is not a virtue. It is the expensive price you pay for your own bad engineering.
And the final concept, consequence geometry.
The invisible topography of your organization. It is the distinct slopes, gradients, and swamps that dictate the path of least resistance for every piece of data in capital.
You do not change people. You use structural intervention to regrade the environment so that the outcome you desire becomes the most logical, inevitable path forward.
That brings us to the end of our analysis, but as always, we want to leave you with a final, provocative thought.
Something to deeply consider as you close this out and step back into the reality of your own operations.
Consider the precise moments during your day when you feel the most vital, the most necessary to your company's survival.
Tomorrow morning, when you are scanning your inbox and you feel that overwhelming, deeply conditioned urge to hustle.
When you are just about to forcibly push a stalled project forward, when you are about to manually override an automated process because you lack patience, or when you are drafting a frustrated, high-excitation email to a department head stop.
Just freeze for 1 second and ask yourself this question.
Am I demonstrating true leadership right now?
Or am I just paying the noise tax for my own broken architecture?
The struggle isn't the cure. The struggle is the disease. Stop pushing the boulder. Start designing the hill.